Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. You know, it's the end of the year and I've come to a decision. You know, I've been working on the Cobra Jet year and a half, whatever it is now, and I've been trying to do all the prep work and get it ready for paint. And the weather has not been conducive to that. I've been dealing with the cold weather as we all have, and today, the last couple days, we've had some fantastic weather here in Georgia. But apparently, we're going to be getting some tremendous cold coming through. And I won't be able to do any paint anyway. I won't be able to do much of anything to the Cobra Jet car. And I know it needs primer, and I'm not going to be able to put that on. And I've decided, because I've said this before, I was going to start on the Fangled project. So, I've come to the conclusion that I need to rearrange the garage. Now, I have currently my Mach 1 sitting underneath the lift, the 68 coupe sitting on top, and all these boxes and pieces and parts. Some of these over here are for the Cobra Jet. Those are like nuts and bolts and stuff like that. Everything that is sitting on my Mach 1 belongs to that car. So what I'm going to have to do, because I've been dealing with some other things around the shop. I had a tree fall and land on the roof, and I had to rebuild my soffit and fascia on the far side. And thankfully the weather's been good for that. And I have the door open right now in front of the shop, so that's fantastic. But I know that the cold is coming, so I'm going to have to do a bunch of shuffling around. I feel like this is probably a good time to do this, because I'm not going to be able to do any paint work. So I'm going to do a big shuffle. I'm going to move the Mach 1 forward and off to the side, and I'm going to bring the 68 down, and then move it, and then put my Mach 1 car back on the lift and put it up. So yeah, just going to take some more shuffling and probably a few more of these. Now, this is not an endorsement necessarily. I do like these mocha iced coffees, and these are on Amazon, and I do drink these quite a bit, so keeps my energy up. But regardless, I'm going to get started on this, and a lot of this will probably be time-lapse. So let me get started on that, and then I'm going to talk about what's going to happen with the 68 project moving forward. So, time to get started. Alright, so the Mach 1 rolled pretty nice, so it's out from under the 68. And you know, I can't get over the looks of these cars. I really do love the 69 and the body lines, even with this primered fender, no door, and this quarter that started off as a full quarter, and I trimmed it down because I didn't want to cut all the way up into the roof and ruin all of that stuff up there. These still look really cool, especially with the Magnum 500 wheels. So, you know, I can't wait to eventually get this on the road and be driving it. But I need to get this down off of the lift. And there's parts and stuff inside of this car as well. And of course, some of those will have to be disposed of later on. They're not necessarily good parts. There's a bunch of random stuff up in there. And if you haven't seen this car before, I'll just reference this real quick. The bottom of this car, the floor pans were completely shot, not usable at all. But the biggest problem with this car was it was rear-ended. And if you haven't seen this before, both these rear frame rails are kinked and collapsed somewhat. And so this car was destined to either get completely reworked or be salvaged. And these quarters, you can see all this junk that somebody else had done. When this was hit, it was hit right on this frame rail, which compressed everything, and they just tried. I mean, I give them credit for trying, but all this is mangled. This is bowed out here, compressed there. So this would have been a challenge just to try to get it back together. And the fact is, it's just a plain Jane 68. This had really no options at all. It was just a V8 automatic car, no console, no power steering, no power brakes, no AC, just a basic car. The only thing it had going for it was that dark green that they had on the Bullet car, and that was the only advantage. And of course it had been repainted resale red at some point. So again, this car will be made into smaller pieces and become part of the fastback. So I'll get it off the lift and hopefully get everything get this car on the lift without any hassle. As we take a look at what's going on here, again, I've talked about already the damage to this car, but I'm going to start disassembling, and primarily what I'm looking to salvage: front fenders, doors, hood, probably going to salvage the rocker panels. I have to salvage the dash. I'm debating on where I want to end up with as far as the A-pillars, if I want to keep the factory ones or not. I'm still kind of debating on that because I have all of the pieces for the side, new sides for this. And this car will be starting with a one-piece convertible floor pan and then build up from there. I don't think the process is going to take that long overall to build the body, simply because I'm not doing it like I did the Cobra Jet, where I had to take a bunch of pieces out and salvage, certain parts. Basically, none of this is usable. Obviously the quarters and all this stuff won't be used, and I'll be, again, using what I can up front here. So I also will try to salvage the cowl. I want to make sure that it is solid. So this will get opened up and removed, and if it's good, I'll run with it, clean it up, and put that back on the car. Again, I'm debating on what I want to use, because I know like the B pillars, those will be part of the new fastback setup. The A pillars are in great shape, and I may or may not remove those. I don't know yet, but I know I'm going to take the rocker panels out. Those do have date codes on the bottom, which is nice to have, nice touch on these cars. None of the front clip is going to be used, so not the frame rails, not the shock towers, none of that stuff. So it's going to be just sheet metal and a few pieces from inside of the car that's going to be used on the fastback part of it. So as I was moving the car back into position, I had to keep adjusting it left and right slightly, and the reason for that is I try to center the car as best I can, and I actually have marks on the floor that match up to the Mustang wheelbase. So by doing that and having those marks show up and get the tires lined up with those correctly, I'm pretty confident with where I have it. And of course I lifted it up, and that's the first time it's been on the lift. So let's take a look at this car. Now again, all this is original. You can still see all the little date codes stamped into everything, except this control arm's been replaced, this control arm's been replaced, and that spring has been out. And if you had noticed, this car actually sits, I think it's low on the right side, the way it was normally sitting. and I figured it out that the springs, they cut one coil off of that one. So apparently they started working on that side of the car and never got to this side, because these are the original control arms and all that stuff. And if you notice also, this doesn't, like, a lot of these are all bent, and these seem to be pretty decent condition. Coming back into the bottom of the car, there's no rust here. This firewall still has undercoating on it, and of course they sprayed it with the primer to try to prep it, I guess, but I wish they would have cleaned it up completely, because there's undercoating all over. The original undercoating is still on this car. So this car is really, really solid overall, except for one spot, and that is this corner. Now, I don't know exactly what happened here, but here is a weld seam, and it doesn't quite line up with this hole correctly. And I know I can put my finger inside of that, and I can feel, you know, the seat riser and part of this weld step here. I don't know that I want to mess with that very much, because it doesn't look bad. It actually has the right, like, rib count and everything on the on that piece. But I may work on making this fit better. Like, I may cut this and re-weld it into more of a butt joint so that it doesn't show up so much. They did just overlap this section right here. Not necessarily a fan of that, but again, this isn't a concours show car. This isn't something that's going to get judged somewhere for minor sheet metal imperfections. But all this undercoating, you can see how thick it is. Very, very thick. All these areas here, and especially around this seatbelt mount, they just pile that stuff on. And of course, this would not have had the red undercoating on top of, I mean, the red primer, let's say. In this case, it's brownish. On, you know, it would have been underneath this, not on top. But everything else is just rock solid. I mean, there is not a spot that I can point out that says, "Oh, this is so bad." I know that they had cut off this lower section of the drop-off panel, so that I'm going to keep that and just rebuild that with another piece, like I did on this side. I just rebuilt this little corner, and you know, the quarter panel lines up really nice. So I did replace this outer wheelhouse already. You probably saw a video on that previously, but I'm just so happy with the condition of this car. Everything is just so solid. So just a look at the Mach 1, and of course I will be starting on this. We'll see how far I can get with this video in particular. I may just start pulling sheet metal off, getting the car cleaned out, and starting to you know, take it all apart as necessary. Alright, I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but as I mentioned, I'm going to be taking all the front sheet metal, the doors, and various other parts from this car to make it into the fastback. So what I plan to do, because I want to salvage the roof for this car, I want to salvage the B-pillars, possibly the A-pillars as an assembly. I plan to cut off the quarters, cut everything loose that I can to keep the roof A-pillars and the B-pillars all intact. So I want to keep the inner structure, the B-pillar, the package shelf, possibly the deck filler panel. I'll make that all one piece. So I'm going to cut off the quarters. I will cut off the wheelhouses. I will try to keep the rear seat divider as an assembly. As I pointed out before with this car, it had been rear-ended, and even the transition panel is bent. So I'm not worried about any of that stuff being salvaged, because it's not usable technically anyway. But once I get all this loose and off, I will work towards getting the front loose as well. I did say that I was going to try to save the cowl, and that's still my intent. I'm going to look at that a little bit harder once I get everything apart and see what I want to do with that. So at this point, again, pull sheet metal and start separating everything. I need to empty out the inside of the car and make sure there's nothing in there that's going to be affected by the plasma cutter that I'm going to pull out here in a little while, and get this thing in smaller pieces. So as you can see, I started removing everything from inside the car. I pulled out some new quarter panels. I pulled out the interior sheet metal that they had on the floor pans, the seats, the doors, pulled all that stuff out of there, and was just, you know, going through all of the pieces and parts that were with the car when I bought it. Now, a lot of these parts I would probably not use, even if it was time to put it back as a coupe. These are really low quality parts, and I'll probably show you that some detail on that in just a minute, so you have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. But a lot of this stuff is just very generic and not the best you can buy. All these parts were bought many years ago. So while there is a bunch of stuff that came out of this car, you know, there's 2 new quarter panels, there's 2 floor pans, there's a new shock tower, there's a whole bunch of, there's 2, the seat risers aren't any good. The doors, of course, are in good shape. And I want to show you some detail work, because these quarter panels, these were from Mustangs Unlimited. And if you remember back when I did Jade, I was working on the quarter panels because they had this kind of weird indent section right about there. And when I went to Mustangs Unlimited, I had bought 2 quarter panels. One, I think, was exactly one of these, and the other one was slightly different. Now, some of the detail that you deal with when you're trying to do these restoration type work, or this type of work, is the quality of the stampings. Now, I'm just referring back to the time period whenever we had limited options, let's say. So, one quick thing on this quarter panel. I would not use these quarter panels on a car that I was putting together that I wanted to have it super nice. And the reason for that is the quality of this. These pieces, these are all just round. There's no defining corner on any of this. Even up here, all this is just a very weak stamping, very round, and does not mimic anything close to the original. I know people have shown these or asked questions about these panels when they've done work on their car. There's been posts on Facebook that, hey, how can I fix this? Well, look at this. There's no corner there. There is absolutely nothing there in this stamping to make it look good. So you come back over here at this original one and look at this body line. That is crisp and clean. Even up here, this top line is a lot more crisp. Even though it's all bent, it's a lot more crisp than what's on that generic quarter panel. And then you come down here and you look at the points like that alignment with the door. You come back to these, it's just round. There's nothing there. These things might be good on like a dirt track car, you know, something you're going to turn into a stock car that you didn't care about. That's the way I look at this stuff. Now, one other detail that I want to really point out is the difference between the scoops, because when you look at your doors, you have a very defined shape to that door, and it mimics that on the car very well. You look at this, and I'm going to have to set the camera back up to give you a better angle, but I'm going to show you the difference right here. So if I take this and I put it on the recessed area, you can see that I can just get my hand underneath that. I mean, it's a snug fit up here where it should be pretty deep, and then as I come across, it gets tighter, like my hand starts to hit right there. Come all the way back to this part of it, and this recess, it's unbelievable that is actually, this high point in the center is almost the same as these 2 points, or at least that's the impression you get. So very little effect in that scoop shape. So if we do the same comparison here, and you look at this, and hopefully you can see the angle here, there's about a 1/4 inch of space between my finger, or my fingers, and I can go all the way down and just start to make contact down here. Now remember, this affects your door line as well. So if you have something that is not the correct shape, you're going to be fighting with it the whole way. Come back here, and you see this scoop pattern. I'm all the way back. I'm all the way back to these edges. And look at that scoop. It's still not touching. It should never touch. This should have enough space for your hand or your finger to get in between all the way up. So that's why I would not use those other quarter panels for anything. All right, as I mentioned before in the previous video, I'm pretty confident that this car had been hit on this driver's side front. And part of that is there's some wrinkling up here on the apron, and there's a bunch of wrinkling down here in the apron as well. And then coming further back, this part of the rear apron is buckled. This is tucked down. So there's a bunch of stuff going on here that denotes that it had been hit. Another thing in this particular car is this shock tower. There's a huge crack right there. There's separation up there at the top, and there's a crack down here at the bottom. So I'm going to say I wouldn't want to use probably much of any of that anyway. Not that it matters, because for this project I have the new frame rails from Dynacorn with the one-piece apron and the little cutout for the Mustang 2 style suspension that we're putting on it. So really none of this up front is going to get used, and not much else, honestly. So I want to start taking things apart. I do want to cut the get the roof and everything off of this, because that can be used later, but if for another project. But at this point, none of this really matters. I even have a new firewall, but I'm going to start taking things apart and get out the handy dandy plasma cutter to make some things happen. So that took a little effort, but I think the problem was the body filler that has been piled up on this quarter panel. The plasma cutter was having trouble getting through that. And I did knock some of that off, and it helped, of course. Now, you may have heard, as I was cutting this loose, you could hear some pop, pop, pop sounds. And that was the stresses that are still in the metal from that impact that it had taken. So, you know, I'm not saving really any of this stuff here, except for the inner structure and the roof. What I plan to do is separate the welds here on the wheelhouse and back here. And then as I come around to the inside area, I will save the trunk mount point, the hinge mount points, and then cut off the rest of the wheelhouse and all that. It doesn't need to come with it, but we'll see how things come apart, because the inner and outer wheelhouse, they're sandwiched right here together, and then part of the inner structure is on top of that. So I may end up, even though I will take this loose, I may end up cutting around, let's say, to break this stuff loose. It is complicated to do it this way, just because of all the overlaps of welds. I've already taken loose the bottom of the back seat riser area there, and of course it is attached still to the inside or to the inner wheelhouse. So that's simple enough. I can just drill those welds out, and that'll free up that piece. So it's just going to take a little bit of figuring to get it all apart, but I'm started. So simply enough, I sanded down the top of the spot welds so that I could locate them and start drilling out the welds. I use a regular small drill, and then I use a step drill, just easier that way for me. And then I use my chisel tool to knock loose those welds. I did the same thing on the inside at the wheelhouse, and again, you just started with a small drill and then stepped it up with the tapered staggered drill bit, the unibit as they call it, from Harbor Freight. Again, using the chisel, and I found that if I just bashed the structure of the wheelhouse, that it made it easier to get the chisel in there and separate those welds. You know, it's really surprising how little actually holds all this together when you think about it. Now, here I went to the inside of the B-pillar, and I used a much larger drill bit. And when I do this, I'm not trying to drill through the hole or drill through the metal. I'm just trying to remove the top part of the spot weld. And so by using that larger bit and rotating around the drill, I can weaken that weld and then come back and chisel it out. Now, I also worked on the front section of the B-pillar. Now, this is a little more challenging. Again, I'm using a large bit, and I'm just kind of wobbling it around to make the welds weak. Now, I did try a couple different things here, and I'm not as concerned with this B-pillar section because I'll probably have to rebuild it anyway. It's really hard to get in there and separate that. I tried a couple different things. I even tried to heat up the braze, but it didn't seem to weaken up in that corner where the braze meets the rocker panel and the B-pillar. So I did make a cut and then weakened it up a little bit more. I was able to get it loose with some effort, but it's just one of those things where this area, when they welded that together, it's really hard to get in there with anything. So I did grind down part of the weld area with my cutoff wheel just to weaken it up, and it seemed to do the job. When I tried to heat this up and tried to weaken the braze, it didn't work. You'll see some residue here from that in just a second. A little bit of soot collected in the corner, and I elected to just cut it with the Ziz wheel and then chisel it loose. And this was enough to get it loose. Now, there are a few hidden spot welds here and there that you have to find, but overall, you can do it. Just have to find those spot welds. All right, so I've made some good progress here, and I just want to show you some of the stuff that I've already done. I did separate both sides, the bracing for the hinge mounts, so that's out of the way. Of course, I've already talked about this, taking that loose. And then on the inside, I didn't do the driver's side yet, but on the passenger side I did break loose those spot welds that hold the seat brace. So now this is all loose, okay? What I also did, I didn't show you this, I took some measurements. So underneath that clamp over there and right here, you see 54 inches. So from this location to the other side is 54 inches. And I labeled it as such. Here, and I know it's a little hieroglyphics, I drew a line when I measured from the corner of the torque box, and I just drew a line at 59 inches, and so I know that's to the torque box. And I did the same thing on the other side. The measurements are working out pretty good. It look like they're in a very similar location. Even this one, 59, and a little easier to read, to torque box. So that gives us, you know, any kind of deflection, we can kind of narrow it down a little bit. I am going to continue to cut things off, and I think what I'm going to do back here, again, is I want to cut off these wheel houses. Now, I'm going to try to keep all this bracing that is attached to the pinch weld together. I don't want to separate that just yet, but I want to be able to take this corner, you know, roof section, everything off in one piece. So I'm going to cut probably inside of here. I may have to come in from the bottom and cut across this pinch weld, go inboard, and then come forward and just somewhere cut this off. But I need to cut it off down here, so this piece will be left with the roof structure. So it's progress. Now I'm still debating on how I'm going to move forward with the front section. I was looking it over a little, and I did find some rust in the towers, not internally, but at the base. So I'm kind of on the fence about what I'm going to do with the cowl panel just yet. I may end up leaving this all together, this section, and isolating off the A-pillar like I did in the back, breaking loose these welds here on the kick panel, and then may just cut the firewall off, because I'm not going to use that firewall for anything. I may just cut it off and be able to lift all that up in one shot and take the whole top of it off. And all of this, of course, is all basically to salvage these rocker panels, and not much else, to be honest, but it's going to make it happen. Alright, I feel like I've made some good progress today, and I've got everything cut loose on this corner, so I can lift it up, I can see daylight through all the cuts and everything else, and that is good progress. Now what I plan to do is repeat the same process on that side. I'm going to cut off this tail panel, get it out of the way. I'm not going to film all of that just because it's already been done, and I don't want to bore you with information you've already seen. So for this, I'm going to continue today to try to get the back section loose, and then the next video I'll work on getting all the front loose. You know, ultimately I don't know if I'm going to use the cowl or not, but all this other stuff is good, and I am salvaging this for another project as well. Along with that, I'll be taking out these rocker panels. I like the original rocker panels mostly because they're the stamping is better, and they're also two-piece because there's a seam right there, and the aftermarket ones, it's all one piece. And people do have problems with those. Sometimes they're a little too wide, and you end up cutting that thing up to make it fit anyway. So I would much rather use the originals and give it a better appearance overall. So I'm going to continue working on that, and like I said, next video will be this front section. And once I get that off and get the rockers off, there's really not much else that I'm going to use from the rest of this car. So that'll be the end of this video. Now, I want to thank my patrons first of all, who continue to support me and help me make these videos. YouTube doesn't pay me very well, but my patrons help keep me going. And if you're interested in becoming a patron, there is a link in the description below, and you can follow that link, or you can follow any of the other links that I have listed. I have products listed for Amazon. I have other links to various other tools and stuff that I've used, and just check that out if you would. If you would, I would also like that you would give a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do, because there's a lot more videos to come. And this is the Fangled 68 fastback project, so keep that in mind when you're researching this stuff. But that'll be it, and until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.